Hasanabiism. I want to watch this Jose video.
Yes, a viral video made the rounds of a group of armed men breaking into an apartment complex in Aurora, Colorado. It was claimed that these men were a part of the Tren de Aragua gang from Venezuela. Right-wing media in particular used this story to emphasize the danger of immigration from the southern border, as Aurora had recently seen an increase in migrants attempting to enter the United States from the south, particularly from the country of Venezuela. And now this video was being used to popularize this narrative that criminal migrants were taking over apartment complexes and terrorizing the residents. This was very quickly exploited by Donald Trump during his campaign when he would claim that Aurora had been taken over by violent gangs.
We settled beautifully into your community to prey upon innocent American citizens. That's what they're doing.
The real story isn't quite so sensational, but that's to be expected when it comes to right-wing media. Vilifying immigrants is a time-honored tradition in that space. What was more disappointing to me was watching some media outlets, claiming to be on the left, repeating this story without important additional context, and thereby missing an important element of the story. I imagine I have some overlap in viewers with this channel, so here's a little disclaimer before we dive in. TYT has been getting a lot of smoke from the left recently for a variety of takes, particularly when it comes to street-level crime. While it would be interesting to go over all of those and determine what sort of conservative streak may or may not be running through that network, this video isn't really about that. I wanted to focus on this story specifically because, as was seen a month later, they released a second video doubling down on their original commentary and once again carrying water for what I would ultimately learn was a cynical PR campaign. Also, as a note before we begin, since this story has had numerous developments since with lots of contradictory information coming out, I wanted to be careful to cite sources that would have been publicly available before this video was originally published on the main TYT channel. I'll be touching very briefly on those additional developments at the end of this video, but for now, I really want to focus on the video titled, Venezuelan Gang Takes Over an Apartment Complex, or Did They? Which did a terrible job of...
This is something that me and Marat both love, paying attention to, tracking Cenk's political journey throughout the last couple of years. So
I don't hate on Cenk anywhere near as much as Hasan does. I just want to make that abundantly clear.
No, I don't. First of all,
I want to make it abundantly clear.
That's Unk. I love Unk.
Yeah,
that's crazy. Look, the uncle-nephew bond, regardless of political disagreements, is stronger than anything else. Okay, blood is thicker than water.
Okay,
never
chill.
forget. Never forget. Marat actually, unfortunately, shaved his fucking beard, and I'm really mad.
Bro, I got a haircut last night, and then this morning I looked like one of those hudges that have like this slick hair and like the untamed beard.
Yeah, you looked sick. Your beard
I was like,
looked amazing.
No, we're not doing
his
this.
beard was like this, chat.
I literally shaved it like an hour ago.
I'm so sad that you shaved.
I mean, it's still long.
He's so skinny, chat. He's like lost too much weight. He's like catching up to me actually in weight loss.
We're about what, 8 pounds apart right now?
Yeah, he's like 230 something. He needs to put on some fucking muscle mass though. You know what I mean? Beard police, we really are a Salafist community. I know. I told him to invoke the holy principles of Islam. You know, the important principles of Islam is halal to have a good strong beard, and it's haram to shave it. But he did it anyway. He wouldn't listen to me, and he did it.
Okay.
Stop insulting all the men in your life. What? Dude, look at this. Look at how insane Twitch streaming is. Where like someone can come in here and be like, I am going to micromanage parasocially the relationship that you have with some of the closest individuals in your life.
Wait, are they talking about Cenk or are you talking about me?
I meant that as a joke, lol. Okay. I thought you were being serious. All right, let's
describing this story. This video was published on September 5th, 2024.
You're watching footage from last August featuring members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua breaking into an apartment unit in Aurora, Colorado.
10 seconds in, and we
crazy.
already have a noteworthy mistake.
Yeah.
The men in this video, at the time of this video's upload, had not been identified. Although they would be identified a few weeks later, the police were reluctant to assign any kind of gang affiliation to them, never mind saying they were part of Tren de Aragua. Considering how this story is being used to fuel anti-immigrant rhetoric, claiming these men to be migrants, specifically criminal ones in a gang, before they have actually been identified,
I mean, they
seems
seem
to me
organized,
irresponsible.
So like, that's not that
They seem organized, and it's like, yeah, I can't believe that there's gang activity in an incredibly low-income neighborhood. Of course there's criminal gang activity in a low-income neighborhood. The idea that this is a mass criminal enterprise that has overtaken specifically this one singular slumlord's properties is fucking nutty.
I like that somebody said a group of friends can be organized too.
Yeah.
It's very wholesome
To
of you,
put
Chad.
the issue of gangs in Aurora into a broader context, an article in the Denver Post using information from the police detailed at least 36 different gangs in Aurora, totaling 1,355 members.
It's crazy.
And based on all the articles I've read, the highest estimate I've seen for Tren de Aragua gang members in Aurora was about 15 to 20 people. But whether or not there's gang violence in Aurora isn't really the problem I have with this video. There are gangs in every big city, and some of them may include immigrants. The real problem is that there is a much deeper context that's not really being acknowledged here.
This incident has sparked a big debate and I believe some gaslighting about whether or not there is a problem with Venezuelan migrant gangs basically taking over apartment buildings or causing violent crimes at these apartment buildings.
This is where the video really starts to go off the rails. Gang violence and a gang takeover of an entire building are very different propositions. And that latter one has some important history behind it within this story. But there's another one in the video that does a better job demonstrating of what I think needs to be pushed back against in this video.
Now, a lot of people say, oh, the property owner is a bad guy. That doesn't prove anything. The property owners could be bad guys that don't take care of the rodents and the bed bugs, etc. And a Venezuelan gang might have taken over the apartments. Those two facts are not at all logically connected.
To say that reveals a complete lack of knowledge about the origin of this story.
Dude,
But to really understand where this story came from and why it became such high-profile news, we have to go back a little bit before this video made an appearance. Before I start the story, I do have to establish who the players are in all of this. The gang takeover narrative affects 3 different complexes that have supposedly been taken over. The first one, where that infamous video was captured, is the Edge at Lowry. The Edge at Lowry is a group of buildings, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to refer to the collective group of buildings as the Edge at Lowry. The second location is Whispering Pines, and the third is Aspen Grove, which is more commonly called Fitzsimmons Place. As you might have noticed on the map, these complexes are pretty far from one another, each several kilometers away. The fact that they're so distant raises an interesting question as to why these 3 in particular have supposedly been taken over. They aren't the only apartment buildings in this neighborhood, after all. One common thread is all 3 of these complexes are owned by a guy named Zev Baumgarten. These properties would be managed by a company called CBZ Management, which is also owned by Baumgarten. After they were purchased in the intervening years, these properties would rack up dozens of complaints that were filed with the city. It also received a number of code violations. You can read some of these historic complaints online pretty readily if you look at the Better Business.
Yeah, it's just how wonderful that this slumlord that was so bad that even like the libertarian state of Colorado had decided that there's like a genuine problem with the Uncle Shaky Gurga is here. This is not a drill. Should I make him watch this? I feel like he's gonna get mad if I make him watch this, so I don't want to upset him. I don't want to upset Shaky Gurga. Get the clips ready, chat. We got to show him Shaky Gurga. Where's the OG clip? I want the Alan Lichtman clip. I want the Shaky Gurga clip. I'm so excited. It's Thanksgiving time. Merhaba. Oh, wow. Aman yok bir şey yapmaz o. Okay, Kaya, come here. Place. Good girl. Okay. My family's coming in now. Just because our governor's a dumbass doesn't mean we're all dumbasses. No. Get your ass back there. What the hell? That's crazy. That's crazy. Little lady thought she was doing something. Kaya, run? No. Okay, I'll keep watching this before
Bureau's website for CBC
Chunk
management.
Weigert gets here.
The state of disrepair and disregard for properties seems to be pretty common for any building managed by this company. Complaints include broken appliances, bug and rodent infestations, and questionable charges costing tenants hundreds and, in some cases, thousands of dollars. It presents the impression that these properties were managed with minimal to no services. These issues persisted for years, well before the arrival of a large number of migrants in December of 2022. That arrival, by the way, was part of Texas Governor Greg Abbott's project to bus various people who had crossed the border to other states. The total number of newcomers to the Denver area was just under 43,000 as of October of 2024, and it's estimated that half of these people have relocated to other parts of the country, either for better opportunities or to be with family members. These people are often labeled as Venezuelan. This isn't entirely accurate. Venezuelans make up just over a third of this population. The next most common group are Colombians and Mexicans, but being the largest demographic within the group, typically they are just stereotyped as Venezuelans. As the code violations and tenant complaints piled up, eventually the city of Aurora decided to step in regarding these 3 properties. They planned to first shut down Fitzsimmons Place in mid-August, and then Whispering Pines and the Edge at Lowry in the following weeks. Baumgarten was facing 81 charges and was scheduled to appear for a trial on August 27th.
I gotta pee.
And then again on September 5th for another 24 charges related to vehicles. All of these were for just one of the buildings, Fitzsimmons Place. With the building set to be closed by the city in 2 weeks, Baumgarten began to fight back by claiming in the media that the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua had taken over his properties and were preventing his team from performing regular maintenance at the building. This is where the gang narrative takeover first entered the media cycle. And to highlight just how that entered the media cycle, we can look at an article from the outlet Westword, which referenced an August 5th statement regarding the gang takeover from CBZ Management that came through a Florida-based PR firm, Red Banyan. A quick look at the PR company shows us that they specialize in helping repair the reputation of people and businesses damaged by scandals, and they hype up their ability to place stories within the media. It does seem a bit strange that the property owner was complaining about not being able to afford to make repairs, but he somehow had all this money to hire a PR firm. As I pointed out earlier, these apartments were a complete mess before the arrival of any of these migrants, and the timing of these claims really gives the game away. If a Venezuelan gang was somehow preventing these apartments from receiving regular maintenance, it's a wonder that they were able to do this for years before any Venezuelan migration wave came in at all. As an interesting point of comparison, Baumgarten owns several other buildings in Denver, buildings, you won't be shocked to learn, that also have numerous health and safety violations. One of the residents of one of the Denver properties discussed the poor living conditions, saying, "What's going on in Aurora, that's essentially what's happening to their properties in Denver. It just hasn't gotten the same attention." By the way, this comment does come from a mid-September article, so I won't blame TYT for not being aware of something that hadn't been published yet. Though all the other details I've shared so far were readily available throughout articles published in August. One of the major differences between the 3 buildings in Aurora and the other buildings in Denver, all in similar states of disrepair, was that in Denver, the city had not stepped in to shut these buildings down. And that might be a reason why there are no news stories about a Venezuelan gang seizing control of them. Baumgarten told this gang takeover story to his lenders, which is how they decided to create a report. Let's go back to the TYT video for that.
Now, the video that we showed you earlier was taken later in August. So even before that incident occurred, there were already concerns about gang violence. There was already a law firm investigating it on behalf of the lender.
The first major issue with this report is that it's specifically about Whispering Pines, not the Edge at Lowry, which is where the viral video comes from. The video really conflates those 2 properties in an unhelpful way, including mistakenly listing one of the residents from the Edge at Lowry as being from Whispering Pines, and I think it demonstrates a general lack of familiarity with many of the elements of this story. But to look at the details of the report itself, it was put together by the law firm.
Yeah. Not only that it was put together by the law firm, which obviously stands to gain from, lying in this situation. They're trying to build a fucking case, if not a legal case, but at least like a case in the court of public opinion, and massage the narrative that suits the obvious fucking landlords that have hired them. But also, I read Anna's Substack on this. Now, I'm not, I didn't even know that Anna had a Substack. But the reason why I read Anna's Substack on this particular matter is because my mom printed it out because she was confused and knew what my take was on this. And she printed it out. So I'm actually very familiar with Anna's commentary on this subject. And I know for a fact that it was actually filled with falsehoods. Anna Kasparian did something on her Substack when she was doing coverage over this that I've seen conservatives do time and time again. Take a bunch of real criminal cases and compile it together and make it seem as though this was all happening with the Tren de Aragua gang that was all working to overtake this apartment complex. There was, I believe, like 35 different arrests, up to 35. I can't remember the exact number, but there was like 20 to 30 different arrests that had happened periodically over the course of like multiple years. Okay. That had happened in Aurora, Colorado. And Anna had basically compiled all of those arrests from local news to present a narrative that it was actually Tren de Aragua that was, dominating this specific apartment complex to suit the original argument that she had presented, that Tren de Aragua was like dominating this area. I looked into the actual individual arrests and found every single one. I found out that many of the arrests were for, domestic violence or, assault, battery, things of that nature. Now, these are still completely heinous crimes. Many of the people that she presents actually are not a part of the Tren de Aragua gang either. They're just like other immigrants. Some of them aren't even immigrants. And none of it actually showed that this one specific gang had actually taken over the apartment complex. None of the crimes that they were arrested for had anything to do with the Aurora, Colorado apartment complex being overtaken at all. And it, but if you don't dive in to the actual details and investigate it further, you're not going to be able to come to that conclusion. Fox News does this quite frequently. It's shocking when I see it from someone like Anna Kasparian.
Perkins Coy, probably said that wrong. Considering the dates used, we can infer that the report was put together no earlier than the first week of July. It's very clear that crimes have taken place, but it's difficult to parse from this report alone which ones were dealt with by police and which weren't, and which ones can be substantiated at all. Looking at the more obvious crimes, there was a case of assault in November 2023, but is followed by this interesting line. We have no information on what investigative steps were launched or arrests were made in connection with this violent and unprovoked attack. It seems like something they might have wanted to reach out to the police about, but for some reason they didn't. There are much wilder claims as well, such as child trafficking, but there's no direct evidence of that. The property manager from Whispering Pines says they were told that by a gang member, but that's not really the same as interviewing the gang member. And it's also weird that a gang member would openly discuss their child trafficking plans with the property manager. But that's kind of the whole point of this report. It's not meant to be a listing of definite crimes that have happened that the police have ignored. Rather, it's something presented by a law firm asking the police to look into this without actually figuring out if the police have started looking into this or not. But the TYT video makes a much bolder claim about the validity of this report.
And the report was further confirmed by the Aurora Police Department, which is now denying that there's a problem of Venezuelan gang violence at this apartment complex.
The cops did not confirm the details of this report. The confirmation that's described in this video was actually done by local news, who had requested police reports from around the same time, specifically the report of a housekeeper being threatened. The most contentious claim from this report is about rent collection or extortion, and that's mentioned in the video like this.
The property has recorded footage of gang members knocking on doors without authorization or without any justification, attempting to collect rent from the tenants of Whispering Pines.
Even several weeks after this video has first went up, there is still no firm evidence that to any sort of large scale that this is happening. In this video, the only evidence that's really cited comes from the report. When looking at the report, the only real evidence provided is a story from the property manager and a single image of rent supposedly being collected. The law firm, I guess, might have seen more evidence than that, but none of it made it into the report. One thing that is worth noting, though, is that the man who the property manager consistently identifies as Larry is almost certainly a man named Larry who was arrested by Aurora police back in July. He has so far only been charged with menacing for threatening to kill someone with a gun. This news did come out a few days after the first TYT video, so it's understandable why they didn't know this at the time. But considering this report doesn't actually concern specific police actions that were or were not taken, I'm not sure why they were just so willing to go along with the narrative that this gang is currently controlling the apartment complex and extorting rent from people. The whole rent collection narrative never rang true to me because multiple tenants interviewed in these complexes repeatedly said that they were not paying rent to gang members. The allegations made in the report were a bit of an outlier, and I couldn't quite make sense of it other than my assumption that the report just was not providing full enough information. I believe this hypothesis was confirmed in a November article on the Denver Post. I'll read you an excerpt. "Rent was not collected by gangs," said Chamberlain, the current police chief, last week. "Tenants told police that some people would bang on their doors and wouldn't leave until the occupant gave them $20, he said. Well, I guess it's possible these people are lying. I think it's more than likely that small sums of money were shaken down by these people by criminals, and that was construed to be some kind of rent collection operation. And I don't want to downplay that someone stealing $20 from you when you're low income can be a real blow, but it does not confirm the whole gang takeover rent collection operation that was being furthered by a property owner who needed some kind of diversion to hide the fact that he had let his property fall into complete crap. Also, one last note about that report. The law firm claims it was conducting it on behest of the bank that had lent the money to the property owners. Well, that same bank would then turn around and sue the property owners, so perhaps they were not entirely convinced of the gang takeover either. The second video that came out in October would repeat this claim that whether it was a few units or an entire apartment isn't an important distinction to be made, but that is very much at the heart of this.
Whether they had been taken over in full or partially, wherever you want to land on that, okay? Whatever makes you feel better.
I'm not even convinced that a few units were taken over, but the whole point of this narrative is that the owner of this property is trying to claim that the entire building has been taken over and he's not able to collect rent from anybody. The local outlet, Denverite, took a closer look at the arrest records of the alleged Tren de Aragua members to provide further details, and only one of those arrests seemed to support the takeover narrative. A man was arrested for entering the apartment of two other residents at the Edge at Lowry and threatened them with a gun. He apparently told the couple to get out and then let 5 men in. And there was a comment about how they run this place, although he used a word I probably shouldn't use on YouTube. And this man was arrested. Although an interesting detail about the couple is that one of them was also alleged to be a member of Tren de Aragua, and he was also arrested because of charges from a separate incident involving one of his former roommates, who he assaulted after refusing to pay his share of the rent at a different location. I genuinely tried really hard to find any evidence of gang takeovers, and honestly, this one case is the best I could find. And this was published well after that first TYT video came up. A single unit that was taken over with the perpetrator arrested by police. Now, I haven't inspected all these units myself, and I suppose there are crimes out there that may have been committed that no one has come forward and provided any firm evidence of, but at the very least, I feel very confident in saying that the property owner's story of several buildings being under the control of gangs is, at the very least, a gross exaggeration. Looking through these arrests, one other interesting detail is that for the November 2023 assault at Whispering Pines, the victim was identified as none other than Zev Baumgarten, the property owner who has neglected these buildings. I should make it explicitly clear that obviously this is not okay. Even though he's been absolutely atrocious to his tenants, that doesn't justify some guys beating the crap out of him. There was a man who was arrested for this assault, and he was identified as potentially being a member of Tren de Aragua. Baumgarten pretty much never does interviews, so we can really only speculate what this assault has done to his perception of what's going on in those buildings, but it is quite possible that the experience colored his perspective somewhat. And I should restate, regardless of any sort of assault, his negligence towards the property, including allowing conditions that increased the incidence of crime there, go back well before the Venezuelan people moved into those buildings. The Young Turks video spends surprisingly little time talking about Baumgarten, but they did have another group they dedicated minutes of their time to complaining about.
For the lefties who are watching this, who are concerned, oh my God, please, please, please don't report the truth because it's going to paint migrants in a negative light. The migrants are the ones who are victimized by this. So if you care about migrants, if you care about...
It's weird because like we did actually, at least on this broadcast, feature the migrants that are living in the apartment complexes quite heavily. And none of them agreed that there was a gang takeover. So in a situation like this, they were all saying, no, this is our fucking slumlord who's like left the apartment complex in a state of ruin. Yeah, if I have, on the one hand, a slumlord who has hired a PR firm that is in legal trouble with the local government, with the local authorities, for the horrifying conditions that he's subjecting his tenants to, so much so that like these buildings are condemned. And on the other side, I have the actual tenants who are saying like, yeah, I don't know what the fuck this like this Tren de Agua shit is. Like, yeah, there's gang activity in this area. It's a poor neighborhood. But like, no, the real problem here is the fucking tenant. Not the tenant, sorry. The real problem is the landlord. Yeah, I'm gonna go with them. Like the real victims. I'm not just gonna fucking bring up the victims of this story to drive home a narrative that actually undermines the victims.
About immigrants, you should not want them to live under these conditions.
If you're pushing back against the demagoguing of immigrants, I just did that. That's how you do that, okay? But if you say, in order to push back against that, I'm just gonna pretend that no immigrant has ever committed a crime and that those gangs aren't here and they haven't taken over anything, you sound ridiculous.
Hearing stuff like this makes me wonder what portion of this video comes out of concern for the residents and what portion is being created to push back against annoying people on the left. I'm not saying it has to be one or the other, but it seems like a bit of both are clearly at play here. As someone who is annoyed by people on the left, I understand that impulse. And hey, sometimes it's important to push back against annoying figures who are making it tougher to operate in that space. But when it comes to genuine concern over these residents and how they're being victimized, I've already described a lot of context that was left out of that story. And more importantly, there was no mention whatsoever of what was going on in Fitzsimmons Place, the third property supposedly taken over by a violent Venezuelan gang. If you truly care about the residents in these complexes, I don't know how the story of Fitzsimmons Place can be ignored. So let's go into some detail about that. Fitzsimmons Place was declared a nuisance attracting criminal activity by the city in September of 2023. The city described how crime at the property had gone up 30% since 2019 when it was purchased by Baumgarten. One interesting fact about the nuisance notice is that it has a list of the many crimes that took place at this property in the preceding 12 months, including several before the arrival of any Venezuelan migrants to Aurora. And all of these crimes were before the supposed gang takeover began. The city would insist that crime is not the reason this building would eventually be shut down, but this notice does serve as firm documentation that this has been a long-standing problem at the property and isn't the product of recent immigration. And I really shouldn't have to say this, but if you're claiming that your story is about the crime affecting these people and the only criminals you seem to be talking about are the Venezuelan immigrants, you have more in common with the right-wing media when covering this story than you realize. By mid-August, before the viral video went live, Fitzsimmons Place would be shut down, leaving nearly 200 people without a home.
She says for the past 3 months, she's always paid her rent on time, but has had continuing issues with lighting in the kitchen and issues with the front door and pest control problems. Also, half the month of August nearly gone. Doesn't give her family much time to find permanent housing moving forward.
Listening to the stories of these residents, it's really heartbreaking. They were paying $1,600 a month to live in apartments that had serious problems. Speaking to CBS News, one former resident said,
"Our hot water is turned off every week. We have to boil water to take a warm shower, and there's a lot of rats."
Although many of the residents describe.
Yeah, the crime is out of control, by the way, in this situation. Yeah. It's crime on top of crime. It's crime compounding on crime. The fact that they, like, not only are these conditions horrifying, but they were paying $1,600. Sometimes upwards of $2,000 a month. Yeah.
Is
this in Los Angeles? No. Aurora, Colorado, my friend.
Lack of safety in the community. It's very tough to find anyone supporting the gang narrative presented by the property manager. In fact, following the evictions, the former residents of Fitzsimmons Place filed a class action lawsuit against Zev Baumgarten and his business partner. Notably, it's not the city they were going after or the police department. They blame the property owner for the problems in their building. A civil rights attorney spoke to local news about the issue.
They didn't have any excuse until it was leaked that Aurora was going to be condemning this building. Only just about 2 weeks ago did the Baumgartens and
Yeah. We also, obviously, on this broadcast, interviewed a Hasanabi head who was a former local council member in Aurora, Colorado, who had actually visited these slums before. So, you know, when you actually look at the real victims in this story, and also the real local administrators in this story, you get a very different picture than the story presented by the fucking landlord. Like, I don't understand. Like, I'm not saying don't feature the landlord's perspective in this at all. Yeah, it's still newsworthy to you know, say this is how he is defending himself. And it's also worthy of investigation. But if you hyper focus on what the fucking landlord is saying when their building is being condemned, if you hyper focus on what the fucking landlord is saying as he's in the process of having his goddamn building being condemned, yeah, and not necessarily like feature the actual residents, then you might as well just be doing pro landlord propaganda at that point.
their companies hire a public relations firm to start pushing this narrative that the building was taken over by gangs. And for that reason, they had to cease property management operations. But the reality is they had ceased operations long before this news leaked that Aurora was going to be condemning the building.
By the time the viral video came out, Fitzsimmons Place was already old news. And it's hard to say a gang has taken over a building that has been completely shut down. But realize when people are talking about apartment buildings that have been taken over by gangs, of the three of them, one of them isn't even open anymore. But while we're on the topic of Fitzsimmons Place, those 81 charges I mentioned against Baumgarten from the city were conditionally dismissed. Baumgarten waived the right to a speedy trial and must now reimburse the city up to $60,000 to secure the property. He then either has to sell or lease the property to a new owner, or bring the building back up to code to resolve the many issues it's facing. This needs to be completed in the next 6 months. Although the delay in the trial must be some kind of relief to Baumgarten, it seems strange to me to take that agreement because it seemed like the perfect time to present all the evidence of a gang having taken over a property because of the city's negligence. But instead, he is spending a significant amount of money to secure the building, possibly even more if he decides to bring it up to code, or he'll have to sell the property. If this deal seems a little too generous for the guy, well, I'll have a little more on that later. There is one section of the video that does come close to understanding what might be happening here.
Some of them are saying, no, the gang violence isn't the problem. The real problem is the landlord. But both things can be true, guys. The landlord being neglectful and not taking care of the building could actually attract more crime. That usually happens when gangs or criminals see a building kind of falling apart. They see it as an opportunity to come in and take over. And so I don't see that as, oh, well, it's one or the other. It could totally be both.
What bothers me in this video is that it really dismisses the claims of many of the tenants that are trying to highlight how the property owner has completely abandoned them. The tenants are trying to get people to understand that this isn't a story about crime, or at least it's not a story specifically about gang crime. And the reason that this story made it into the headlines isn't because gang violence is out of control in these buildings. It's because gang violence is being tied to an immigrant community so a property owner can scapegoat them to hide his own negligence. And that's the frustration being created by this video. Instead of focusing on the bigger problem making the lives of these tenants miserable, attention is instead being redirected to the more salacious story of a Venezuelan gang. That's probably why the tenants have been vocal after the fact, trying to change that narrative. But instead of highlighting the many stories of the tenants of these buildings, we instead get clips of Cindy Romero in the TYT video. Honestly, I'm not too interested in digging into the details of this lady because she's a private citizen. But what's more important than this specific tenant is the
only tenant that has actually gone against the overwhelming majority of the tenants that have said it's not the fucking gang activity at all, it's actually this like shit-ass landlord, was someone who was personally handpicked by a right-wing council member, okay, and was given a new apartment. Okay, just so you understand, this woman is like, do I believe her narrative that she has been somehow victimized by these guys? Absolutely. I do. I 100% do. Do I believe that there are, gangs, including but not limited to Tren de Aragua, like, documented gangs born out of American citizens and gangs born out of undocumented citizens operating in this area? Of course I do. I do. But it is impossible for me to contend with the narrative coming from one person when there is an overwhelming amount of narratives that disprove that person's argument. If she were to talk about her own individual and personal experiences, then that's fine. That's understandable. She has every right to do so. But if she's going to portray this as some broader narrative of undocumented migrants overtaking a facility in its entirety, and she is this standalone person, and on top of that, she's gotten a new apartment from a right-wing fucking council member who masqueraded as saving this person from the treacherous grips of Tren de Aragua. I get why. I get why she would have this narrative. What is this? Guess who's a hypocrite and is going on an anti-Semitic stake and kick stream? Ain't no fucking way. First ever steak poker night? Exclusively on kick streaming? No. Full circle. We literally started our friendship shitting on Kick and stake.com and crypto casinos. Look at us now. They'll just clip you and put this on their sub. Please just leave it. I mean, dude, what the fuck? I don't know. I'm sure there's a reason for this. Yeah. I'm glad that Ethan is appearing on non-anti-Semitic platforms like Kick. Holy shit.
Context in which she's being presented to us. And to understand why she's being presented to us in a specific context, we have to talk about a certain Aurora City Council member named Danielle Jurinsky.
Damn, Jose's done a thorough investigation into this, respect. He's bringing up everything that I fucking also covered.
Although she isn't mentioned until late in the TYT video, she does make an uncredited cameo early on.
The governor, Jared Polis, claims that the allegations are a figment of your imagination.
This is so wrong, I'm tempted to call it a lie. Although it could just be that no one really bothered to look up where this imagination comment comes from. Let's look at the full context of the quote here, though. This actually doesn't come from the governor, by the way. It comes from one of his spokespeople. According to police intelligence, this purported invasion is largely a feature of Daniel Jurinsky's imagination. That kind of changes everything, huh? He's not talking about everyone. He means the aforementioned council member Jurinsky. She is described later in the TYFT video like this.
Some streamers have decided to smear the city council member who helped this woman who's low income move out of her home into a safe
talking about me.
place to live. And they smear the city council member as racist because she is concerned about this crime that's going on. Okay.
Although I can't purport to be an expert on Danielle Jurinsky, I can give you a bit of background on her that will help clarify where she's coming from. On July 28th,
I don't know anything about some random fuck-ass Aurora, Colorado council member. I arrived at this conclusion not because of what she did in this process. I arrived at this conclusion by talking to people who were also on that fucking same council. Instead of just reading Fox News articles on this issue, I actually did do some deeper investigations. You know, whether it be featuring the actual tenants and asking them or seeing the PSL, like local organizations on the ground, going to the actual tenants and asking who was responsible for their pain and their struggle, or whether it be interviewing council members, former council members, about the current state of the Aurora Council.
There was a massive gathering of about 3,000 to 4,000 people in a shopping center parking lot where these individuals had gathered to hear about the presidential elections in Venezuela, many of them naturally being Venezuelans eager for news about their home country. The gathering alarmed some residents, and rumors began swirling on social media. One of the loudest voices was Aurora City Councilor Danielle Jurinsky. Jurinsky had already been vocal in the past about her displeasure for the influx of new arrivals south of the border. She is very much an anti-immigration city councilor. Her post on Facebook regarding this gathering was far more heated, though. In part, it read, "Thousands of these folks took over and completely shut down a part of our city. The police were totally overrun and were forced to get out of the area for their safety. A police car was shot up. This is the United States of America. This is your city. Please, please spread the word. This November's election may, in fact, be the actual most important of your lives, your children's lives, and your grandchildren's lives." The Venezuelans were not, in fact, taking over the city. And after the results of the Venezuelan election came in, they pretty much went home. Police would later clarify that while a gun was fired into the air at some point, a police car was not shot up. They also described how police were there for the entire event and didn't make any arrests, and that there were no reports about rioting or people being attacked or businesses being damaged. To be fair, there was a lot of trash left behind, and while that is a shame to see, it's also something you'd find after a music festival or a large gathering of people. But Jurinsky's comments weren't about littering. They were about a Venezuelan gang taking over Aurora. Jurinsky would later claim that this gathering was organized by Tren de Aragua and that it was some kind of test that they were running. This is the imagination at work in this story. It seems as though her attitudes towards immigrants and this apartment complex takeover were a perfect fit. Jurinsky did not enter to this controversy after helping Cindy Romero move, though. In fact, she very clearly went on record about it at least a week prior to that viral video being shot. Around the time of the gang takeover narrative first appearing in local news back in August, Danielle Jurinsky, along with counselors Stephanie Hancock and Steven Sundberg, also started speaking out for the property management company during a public safety committee at this time. They claimed there was a big gang problem in the city, and they didn't believe Fitzsimmons Place was being shut down because of code violations. Here's some footage from that meeting.
We believe that our opinions are not up for debate. This is our beliefs. The three of us believe that there is a gang problem, a huge gang problem, that apartment complexes and areas of our city are being taken over. This is what we believe.
There was another part of this meeting where Jurinsky mentions the property manager for Fitzsimmons Place was physically attacked at the end of 2023.
And then the property manager was beaten so badly he was hospitalized. last November, Mayor, and APD is aware of this.
It's interesting that Jurinski mentioned this particular assault because it was detailed in that report I mentioned earlier that was sent to the city on August 9th that supposedly details how gangs had taken over properties managed by CBZ. This video was uploaded on August 8th, the day before that letter actually arrived to City Hall, so it suggests to some degree that Jurinski
Maybe she just has a real investigative approach and found out about it by herself before this report was put together. Or maybe she's directly working in collaboration with the slumlords. I don't know.
He has been in communication with either CBZ management or the law firm conducting the investigation. Do you remember that settlement that pushed back Baumgarten's trial? The one over Fitzsimmons Place where he's spending 60 grand and might have to sell the property? An interesting detail there is that if you look up the actual agreement, you can see that it was negotiated with a city council member, Danielle Jurinski. So apparently in some capacity, Jurinski was involved in hashing out this deal that created the possibility for Baumgarten to hold on to his property. Just another interesting connection between the two. I suppose she could have been representing the city, although I suspect the city manager was doing that, and considering a few days before this agreement was reached, she didn't believe that code violations were the reasons this building was shut down. So I suspect she wasn't exactly holding Baumgarten's feet to the fire on this one. And of course, all of this was happening before that viral video went live, and Jurinski presented herself as some kind of savior stepping in to rescue a tenant. Jurinski has affixed herself to Romero and is frequently sharing the tenant's story. In one more recent case, she was literally coaching her on stage while she was speaking at a Trump rally.
The loud music, the destruction, the gunshots.
The PR company Red Banyan also has a history of using politicians for its messaging, specifically when it comes to this gang takeover story. Going back to when it first broke in early August, Republican congressional candidate John Frabicatore was identified by that PR firm working for the property owner as someone who was a representative.
Oh, here's my favorite guy. The fucking ICE agent. Is slumlord synonymous with landlord? Yes. But slumlord specifically operates slums. So like low-income housing, oftentimes Section 8 housing, that is left in dire circumstances because the people that your tenants do not have enough financial freedom to get some sort of legal restitution from you. Fabricatory
representative for CBZ Property Management. A quote from a 9 News article reads, Fabricatore said the city didn't want to arrest illegal aliens because of bad optics. And he said,
they always say this. They always say like, oh man, here it is again. The undocumented immigrants getting special treatment. I don't know how the fuck anybody could believe this shit, dude. You got to be a real dumbass to be like, yeah, some of the poorest people in American society also happen to be the most privileged. These institutions that are constantly trying to fucking defend them. It's so stupid. Cherry Court, thank you for the 5 tier 1 gifted subs, helping some of the less privileged in the community by gifting them some gifted subs, allowing them to send links if they choose to see fit. You can also subscribe in order to support the broadcast for $6 or for free with a Twitch Prime. Twitch Primes are free. I haven't done a fucking call out to subscribe in a while. Gotta remind myself and everybody else that we're doing that. Ads are not back. I'm not doing an ad break.
The property owner had invested in improving the building. Now, I'm not saying anyone is on the payroll for one company or another, but I think there is a confluence of interests going on here. We have a property owner creating a gang narrative in an attempt to deflect responsibility for his own negligence towards his properties, and a politician advancing their own career using anti-immigrant rhetoric. So we have two very self-interested parties using this story to advance their own careers, something that is completely missing from that TYT video. To be as fair as possible, there is a decent amount of pushback that comes from the TYT video regarding how immigrants are being demonized by the right.
And overall, when you look at the crime rates, we've been over this many, many times. I hate to break it to you guys, but native-born Americans, twice as violent, twice as many crimes as undocumented immigrants, and 4 times as many crimes as documented immigrants.
And that's great. I'm glad they did that. But this pushback is incomplete when they also don't show how the property owner is complicit in all of this, and also provide cover for some of the conservative politicians who are exploiting this crisis, and presenting a city council member like Jurinsky as someone who simply wanted to help her constituents. A little over a month later, on October 14th, the Young Turks uploaded a second video on the subject titled "JD Vance Interview Gets Tense Over Venezuelan Gangs." And this was not a great video.
The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs.
Fast forward to this past weekend, and you have Martha Raddatz say, no, it wasn't a big deal. It was limited to a handful of apartment complexes.
This is a strange reading of the words that...
Bro, they're not saying only a couple apartment complexes were overtaken. They're saying there were a handful of incidents and issues. No apartment complex was taken over. Why are you agreeing with JD Vance?
That were said. Martha Raddatz is not explicitly confirming gang takeovers of apartment buildings. She tried to clarify that there have been gang-related problems, but then she is misconstrued by JD Vance, someone who has, by the way, gone on record as having manufactured stories to spread anti-immigrant rhetoric.
I say that we're creating a story, meaning we're creating the American media focusing on it.
This is one of these moments that just seems like a breakdown in understanding what words mean. Saying something is a problem doesn't mean confirming how that problem is construed by the other party. Even if Martha Raddatz completely agreed with JD Vance here, is that really the extent to which a story can be confirmed now? A comment from a moderator? I'm not even really sure what to push back against here because there's no real substance, yet it's being treated by this video as some kind of grand vindication. I know this is a common talking point that's been circulated in right-wing media, but it's obviously been exaggerated.
The Aurora Police Department put out a press release about the Venezuelan gang members that they had identified and arrested.
When you look at the details of these 10 men who have been arrested, they don't really speak to any sort of extortion scheme.
Yeah, this is what I was talking about. She wrote this in her Substack. This is the part of the article that I actually had to investigate further. I never covered it on the stream, but I had to literally do a live debunking to my mom who had printed out the Substack.
Apartment takeover narrative. Many of the charges involve things like domestic violence, and several men were arrested over one specific shooting. There was a fight that broke out at a party, and there was an instance of one gang member breaking into the apartment that was occupied by a different gang member. While it's certainly conceivable that some residents at these apartments have been shaken down for money or robbed at some point, a robber might have even said they were calling it rent for living there. This is me being incredibly charitable, as it's hard to find firm evidence of any of that having happened, and certainly not to the extent at which it is being alleged by the property owner. In fact, the original video claiming the poor living conditions and violence had nothing to do with one another was part of the problem. And much like the original video, a huge portion of this video is designed to attack the left.
And I love how easily they just dismiss it like it's no big deal. Do we care about people or not? Do we care about people living in poverty or not?
Then the extreme left goes, aha! That's actually the landlord, and there's no Venezuelan gangs at all. Everybody's fine. No apartments were taken over, and we live in Shangri-La. And when the leftists see this,
Like, who are they talking to, bro? I didn't even know they were like duking it out in the marketplace of ideas like this on their fucking regular broadcast. I
picture, they think they don't exist.
I don't understand why this is part of the story. It just reads incredibly petty and meaningless to engage in this sort of thing. But as someone who considers himself to be on the left, I do feel like I need to respond to this. I'd point out that there are a lot of great leftists doing important work, specifically when it comes to this story. There was one underreported one I really wanted to share, and to be honest, it's a huge part of why I wanted to make this video, because this is something that was not widely reported even in local media. This comes from an article in Denverite.
Isn't spreading disinformation considered to be a form of hybrid warfare in the political science context? I don't think this is like a deliberate disinformation campaign, you know. I think it's just like people legitimately becoming more and more disillusioned and losing hope that anything good can potentially happen, and becoming organically more reactionary on a lot of these issues. How do you non-deliberately fabricate a story as a news organization? How do you non-deliberately fabricate it? You just fucking copy the notes of Fox News because you agree with them. That's how you do it.
Which provided a lot of personal stories of many of the people who were living in Fitzsimmons Place and how they were struggling to find rooms in hotels after their building was shut down. One way in which the city, I think, is to blame for what's going on is how quickly they shut down Fitzsimmons Place. Although there had been a lot of talk of it being shut down, the actual deadline to shut the whole place down was only a few weeks, and a lot of residents simply didn't have the time to find new accommodations. The city, for its part, offered to pay for hotel rooms for a couple of weeks, but residents were pretty much left on their own to figure out what was going on. Much of the work of helping these people fell on volunteers from groups such as East Colfax Community Collective and House Keys Action Network Denver. The article describes them as a group of anarchists, socialists, students, and neighborhood organizers who helped people get water, food, and arrange for their accommodations, making sure they had appropriate transportation and rooms booked so these families wouldn't be left on the street.
TYT did a few stories around the same period about flash mobs that ran into 7-Elevens and snatched chips and shit, and they literally have Fox News credited for photos with a piece. Yeah, I think that there are significantly more pressing issues that are ruining American society than a bunch of fucking people running into a 7-Eleven and grabbing, you know, chips. That's crazy.
As a quick aside, I talk a lot about leftist politics on this channel, and I see a lot of questions about how people can make a difference in their community. And if you're someone who wants to make a positive difference in your community and you're not sure where to start, look for organizations like these. They provide community support to people in really tough moments of their life. And it's really so easy sometimes to make a positive difference. In this case, it was just showing up with some food and water and helping people get from point A to point B. And while there are annoying leftists on the internet who will say all sorts of obnoxious things, I think the contributions of left...
The La Cienega and Olympic 7-Eleven, it was literally teenagers on bikes. Oh my God. Someone needs to put an end to these teenagers, man. If they do it 3 times, it'll be a felony.
Leftists in communities often gets ignored and minimized. They're out there doing the actual work. And
this is why I don't shit on anarchists all that much, okay? While they do demonstrate record behavior time and time again in online spaces, or some of them do a lot of fucking, some of them are just like objectively annoying. They're at the forefront of this kind of mutual aid.
To me, this is what I think of when I think of leftist activism. This article is an important read as it puts a human face on all of the people, particularly those who were affected by this building that was left in disrepair and then was suddenly shut down. And it also describes how stories of rampant gang violence is stereotyping an entire community. To be a Venezuelan person in Aurora right now is to be associated with the existence of this gang, a gang that is incredibly small and has limited to no influence in the city. As an update on the other two buildings that were scheduled to be shut down, Whispering Pines and one of the buildings at the edge of Lowry are luckily staying open, and hundreds of more people won't be forced out of their homes. Even better, a court-appointed third party has taken control of these properties and will begin making long-needed repairs, something that should have been done for Fitzsimmons Place rather than having all the tenants be evicted. At least for the residents of two of the properties, there is some degree of justice. To clarify this just a little bit, the court-appointing third party isn't part of any kind of settlement with the city, who had been threatening to shut the places down. Rather, this is because the owner defaulted on millions of dollars in loans and were sued by the U.S. Bank Trust Company, and the buildings are now in receivership. Also, I want to point out that the bank suing the property owner is the same bank that had that report commissioned about the supposed takeover of Whispering.
In my opinion, they're falling prey to propaganda, which is sad because I only knew about you when I started watching TYT. I stopped watching TYT after 2016. I started organizing since then. I've only gone more left, and I've refound you during your woke bay era. I've literally done the organizing that Jank argues that the online left doesn't do, which feels disrespectful to people like me. TLDR, I stopped watching TYT because I started reading Franz Fanon. Yeah, Yeah, anarchists don't shower because they're too busy doing praxis. That's why they don't shower. I'm not going to shit on anarchists that much. I'll shit on them a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. It is kind of sad to see. Not kind of sad. It's just very sad to see. I don't know. I think this is why I always say, judge me by my enemies, okay? This is why I always say, judge me by my enemies. Because I think it's important to understand that if I have disagreements with people who I otherwise think are, on the same path of justice and truth, and are doing their very best to fight for human rights, fight for emancipation, like, I'm not going to spend a whole bit of time shitting on them, even if I have disagreements, even if they're shitting on me, okay? For years and years, I have maintained this principle, which is that, like, I don't spend a good bit of time talking about people that are, at the end of the day, doing a decent job, sometimes in combating right-wing sentiment. A lot of people did not understand this, like, part of the reason why I never really gave a shit about Vosh and rarely ever talked about Vosh, regardless of the fact that he was constantly fucking ripping into me and presenting me as this, like, pro-Russia guy because of my anti-NATO position, which if he was a little bit better read, he probably would also arrive at that if he was ideologically consistent, was not because, like, I was scared of Vush's unimaginable intellectual superiority to myself. It was because I just didn't see it as a productive thing. You know what I mean? And at most I only fucking joked about the lolicon, goblin porn shit and some of his high notes that I personally do love, because I do think he's a brilliant entertainer when he's not, when he says stuff like, I dropped a tactical N-word to show my interlocutors that I'm unafraid of them, or Tacoma wept. Tacoma wept lives in my mind permanently. I genuinely think it's one of the greatest, like, Aaron Sorkin-esque moments that organically happened. And the fact that it happened because Brace Belden, my famous anti-NATO YPG fighter friend, Brace Belden, was able to trigger him into having that Aaron Sorkin-esque Tacoma Web moment is like, it just is Kino. It's perfect. And I would even say, I wouldn't go so far as to say the same about like Destiny. A lot of people, I think, in his community think that I didn't really fight back or push back against Destiny because I was terrified of his intellectual prowess. And moments when I had a much larger audience than he did and still do. The reason why I didn't do that is because I saw him as a nuisance overall, and I saw him as a parasitic force tacked to my hip that was constantly just feeding off of clips that were completely out of context and creating an environment that was like anti-Hasan for no other reason, just being anti-Hasan. Like that was the major coalition that he was putting together. But like the reason why I stopped the I will never talk about Destiny opinion was because he openly came out as pro-genocide and pro-Israel. Okay? There were a bunch of different things. There were a bunch of different things that like Destiny and Vosh at different points had at a bunch of different points, both Destiny and Vosh had like defended some weird reactionary takes, had weird reactionary tendencies, especially a lot more on the Destiny side, by the way, than Vosh even, before the Israel stuff. But overall, it was like, as long as he's just, actively combating against like idiotic right-wing positions and, manosphere dipshits and any number of different intellectual giants on the right, it's whatever. Who gives a shit, right? The problem is he also was seemingly highlighting and platforming Nazis, which I knew about. Okay, fucking white nationalists and beefing up their personal clout on the side, trying to rebrand them, advocating that these neo-Nazis were not actually Nazis to his own community in the process, giving their phone numbers to other prominent podcasters in an effort to reignite their career, and taking credit for revitalizing the career of Nazis like Nicolas Fuentes. And also simultaneously defending Israel and being pro-genocide. That was what flipped it for me, where I was like, all right, enough of this like silence. I will go after him. Now his fan base might say, oh, dude, it's because he grew in prominence or some shit. He didn't, okay? He hasn't stopped coming after me. The only thing that changed on my end was when he became a massive propagandist while still claiming that he was on the left. He became a massive propagandist for something that I consider to be unconscionable. A good part of his content is anti-Hasan shit. I know. So for me, that's, that's where I draw the line for sure. The reason why I brought this up right now is because I usually apply a level of grace to those who I feel are sufficiently anti-reactionary politics, anti-Nazi. If at any given moment I start recognizing that they are not doing that, then at that moment I'm like, okay, no more grace, no more silence. And I apply this standard pretty evenly across the board to people from many different walks of life, and to virtually every single person. A lot of people actually get mad at me for doing that, and maybe even look for some other cynical reason as to why I'm doing it. They'll say, oh, you're doing it for clout. like with the case of Aiden Ross. You're doing it for clout with the case of Asmongold. No, it's because I want to. I always will hope that people have the capacity to change, and they will come to that. They will come to these conclusions on their own. There's a certain respectability that you navigate with that is very liberal and self-serving. It doesn't move the needle on an issue, but you get a release from the exchange. So it's until you deem them bad actors, no matter the evidence. What? Past a certain point, you will never understand how it feels to hear an immigrant comment on reparations as if my people didn't march for his right to come here. It's deeply disappointing all around. There's a certain respectability that you navigate that is very liberal and self-serving. No, I understand the human condition, I think, better than you do. I'm not as sheltered as you are, I think. If you genuinely think that people do not have the capacity to change and become better versions of themselves, myself included, and many people in this community have gone through that process as well. I don't know what to tell you. Now, it's a foolhardy endeavor, and past a certain point, I do actually drop it. You say Asmon will change any day now, Lamau, but like, you know, I think you guys failed to comprehend that, like, I'm talking about being charitable to people who make a fucking living shitting on me, Asmongold included. I'm saying you get a release from changing people and everyone else isn't wired that way. No, I don't get a fucking personal... Oh my God. It's like saying no act is truly altruistic because you're deriving satisfaction from helping others. Like, yeah, okay, no shit, dude. Yes. You got me. Okay. Yes, I do. I do get some semblance of satisfaction from being able to convince people that they're wrong. Yeah, you're right. You arrived at a fucking brilliant conclusion. Does that change the dynamic at all? I understand the importance of solidarity. I recognize that, at least given the current material conditions and the culture that comes out of it, that America is inherently hostile to any sort of anti-capitalist sentiment. So yes, I will try to change people's perspectives and maintain charitability to the best of my ability, understanding that we do live in a white supremacist, homophobic, bigoted, anti-black, anti-trans, misogynistic, patriarchal society, and therefore a lot of people are going to never really examine the positions that they arrive at due to social conditioning. That's it. I get where people are coming from. I myself have had right-wing opinions in the past on certain issues. Here's me talking about trans issues. I saw this older TikTok that I reposted recently. Call me Nancy Reagan. Not this. That just popped up on my For You page, but here, I'll show you this. This is a great example of exactly what I'm talking about and why I'm always
changes in my own personal politics, where in some ways I've become, I guess, more radicalized throughout the years, but in many ways, like, way more tolerant. Like, I talk about transphobia a lot, right? I'm a cishet white guy. I had transphobic opinions 10 years ago. Many of my trans viewers even had transphobic opinions 10 years ago. Internalized transphobia is a huge part of this. Why? Because gender is like a very rigid thing that we associate with ourselves. Even though it's socially learned, even though it's an expression, we reinforce that through every facet of society. You can't play with Barbies, you got to play with G.I. Joes for a boy, right? You got to wear blue. Even though if you look at FDR, when he was a baby, he just looks like a little girl. Like he's got dress on, his hair is long. Those concepts have changed throughout time, but they become infinitely more rigid in contemporary society, and it's very personal to a lot of people, like what their gender is. So when they see someone break that false notion that gender is actually biological and is very rigid and it is very important to me, what the fuck, it breaks their brain. So that's the reason why, and trans activists say this all the time, the overwhelming majority of Americans and the way that they receive trans people or the way that they think about trans people is just, they don't really think about trans people at all. They just have apathy. You can go in either direction after that. You meet a trans person, they're chill, you start learning and developing empathy for them, or you become this insanely transphobic person like Matt Walsh. And luckily, most Americans are not like Matt Walsh. Right. But why did I describe all of this? It's because I personally went through that journey of like understanding and developing empathy for trans people and became an advocate for trans rights. And I think that everyone is capable of becoming more open-minded and reforming and learning new things, and had changes in my own personal politics where in some ways I've become, I guess, more radical.
There you go. Chad is basically yelling at you for having a higher threshold. While I can find it frustrating, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. I didn't say it's bad. I said how it's not how most people are socially acclimated. People think you are wrong, but you just process things differently. Yeah, well, here I am making an argument as to why I have this position. That's what I mean. Okay? Online leftists abandon material analysis when they see a stinky gamer influencer that gets on their nerves. Then they use the student politics like an Old Testament weapon. It's a means of fake practice. No, but I also understand where the frustrations come from. Also, you called me a liberal. That's why I was frustrated with you. Okay. But I get why people are frustrated. Why the fuck would you? Why the fuck would you not be frustrated when you see your favorite content creator, who is supposed to be the arbiter of all things woke, all of a sudden offering grace to a content creator who you know is like dehumanizing you actively? Okay, I get it. I know where people are coming from. Just don't call it a fucking liberal tendency, because it's not. You ever just have the stream on but not listen? I think many people in this chat do that. Until their entire content becomes fuck Hasan, you don't respond, and I think that's a good thing. Many examples, it derails your thing. You value every single person that disagrees with the take of yours. Yeah. I will say, however, that, you know, this is why we go back to judge me by my enemies, right? If you spend a good bit of time attacking the left over and over again, and the reason why we started this conversation is because we're talking about TYT. If you are constantly trying to farm an audience to show how reasonable you are, by singling out like radical components on the left, on the extreme left, that you are actually directly at odds with, that you are diametrically opposed to show everyone else how good you are, and how moderate you are, how reasonable you are, then yeah, at a certain point you pass the threshold of no return, where you're no longer a leftist at all. You're no longer progressive at all, in my opinion. You know? Why are you avoiding my questions and shying away from addressing my points? I don't know, because you're probably fucking baiting me. Wait, you didn't actually say anything. You just said, why are you shying away? What? He means your haters say that. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that's what it is. I think that there is, I don't know there's no exact science to this. I don't know what the exact point of the point of no return is. I don't know what that threshold is. But just like the Supreme Court justice that once famously said, I'll know it when I see it, when talking about the difference between, you know, porn that was protected by the First Amendment versus things that constitute, what was it? What's the term? I forget. Like gross obscenity. Yes. Things that constitute obscenity that go past the point of just like regular pornographic material that is protected by free speech. I'll know it when I see it.
Pines. I want to include some additional context specifically regarding Fitzsimmons Place that has recently come out regarding when it was labeled a public nuisance in September 2023. In documents that were uncovered by 9 News, a report from a police officer and several communications with city officials show them repeatedly warning the property owners of the growing problem with crime as a result of the poor conditions the building was left in. Numerous recommendations were made to improve safety within the building that simply weren't followed through with. Police even made the offer of helping with security, but there's no evidence that they were ever taken up on that offer. I'm sure to some degree, police could have done a better job of providing safety for any of the people there. After all, several tenants had reported very slow responses to 911 calls. But what these documents do reflect is how the property owners were very much informed on the growing issues within their building and were repeatedly offered solutions and services to help deal with it, and then they seemingly did nothing to address those issues. The documents also make mention of an unnamed gang having a presence in that building, though there is no mention of any sort of elaborate rent extortion plan. The closest they get to that is that apparently after a shooting in October of 2023, threats were made to some residents not to speak to the police about it. And to reiterate, this report only covers Fitzsimmons Place, which was closed in mid-August. I do have one more update about Zev Baumgarten, and this is kind of an odd development. The guy was scheduled to appear in court on October 24th, but apparently the city hasn't been able to find him. Several summons were sent to the addresses registered to him, but they all came back saying that...
Well, when you got the fucking... when you got prominent city council district members on your side, you know, you don't really need to do that sort of thing anyway.
The addresses were not found. They tried sending the summons to his lawyer, but got no response. If anyone knows this guy, they might want to let him know that the city of Aurora is looking for him. And
it is crazy how above the law you are if you're rich. Like, it's crazy. You could just do whatever the fuck you want, dude. God, the American criminal justice system is such a joke.
And he has to appear in court soon. This video was not very fun to make. And it really seems like a piece of bait that was designed for media outlets to further the interests of conservative politicians and a property owner. While I don't think we should never talk about it, period, or pretend like gang violence isn't happening, not providing that additional context, I think, allows stories like these to perpetuate. Another thing that really annoys me in these videos is the ridiculous disparity in power between the two groups being complained about. Even taking the video at face value and pretending it's not leaving out important context that would dramatically change people's understanding of the story, you have, on the one hand, the voices on the right, which include Donald Trump and various high-ranking Republican officials who are in the middle of a political campaign to take control of the federal government. On the other hand, representing the left, you have some online leftists. After looking at all of the context of this story, it very clearly appears to me to be bait, specifically to get people talking about the date.
Yeah, that's the other thing as well. When you find yourself in the throes of reactionary feelings, okay, when you find yourself in the comforts of like reactionary thinking, right, you end up falling for the bait over and over again. And this was something that I talked about with respect to Anna Kasparian, when she was talking about like the other hole or the third hole or whatever the fuck that like random nonsensical Daily Mail argument was. Republicans like the Republican media especially like to focus on random nonsensical shit that is not actionable, that is not meaningful, that is silly. Like it's just a simple afterthought, right? And then they try to present the entirety of the left as this thing, right? Bonus hole, I think was what it was, or birthing person as a term, right? Things that are born out of academia or things that are only utilized in hyper-specific medical settings that Republicans like to grab onto and then act as though this is what the left wants. This is the entirety of the left. No, not academic bonus hole. I'm talking about birthing persons, obviously, when I say like things that are relegated to the academic settings or whatever. And when I hear a story like that, I just laugh. I'm like, yeah, that sounds dumb as fuck. And I'm sure when I say that, there are people who get mad. You know, there are people who get mad at me and they're like, oh, that's a little transphobic. Like trans men can give birth too. And I know that they can, you know, in very, very specific circumstances where they can't take HRT any longer. You know what I mean? It's like one out of hundreds of thousands, not millions of trans people have ever actually, you know, done this. And I don't think that this is something that even trans people as a whole are pushing to the forefront of the public consciousness, especially at a time when they're, being dominated by right-wing legislation that is creating a permission structure to basically write out trans people from existence. And I find it ridiculous to hyper focus on this, even if it is to disparage it, right? Even if it is something that is truly objectionable behavior, let's say, right? I just don't think it's necessary to talk about it at all. And I don't like that there are people who engage in this endeavor without tackling the reasons as to why we're having this conversation to begin with. Okay? As far as this conversation goes, like, a great example of this is like trans people in sports. The only reason why we have this conversation is not because of the ethics of it all, or honesty or fairness in sports, or any of those reasons. The real reason why we're having this conversation is because it is a way to create a permission structure to write out trans people. And it starts with that, but the overarching goals are always to stop trans people from existing, okay? No more HRT, and not like the kind that we all like, not the kind that cis people use, like, balding pills like the ones that I use, which is still HRT, or TRT like Joe Rogan or RFK Jr. uses. Not that kind. We like that kind. We like that kind of, expressions of gender. We like those initiatives. Okay? We just don't like it when trans people are using it. We don't like it, and we need to stop it, and we need to put an end to it. That's the ultimate goal here. No gender affirming care for trans people, right? So I see no reason to spend a good amount of time with people, talking to people that don't even give a shit about, high school athletics. They just don't care. They don't care about women's sports at all. They routinely shit on women's sports. And they're simply using this as a way to find an argument that is that seemingly is more reasonable, okay? Then there's the people who maybe in a good faith try to tackle the problem and offer reasonable critiques to the problem itself and say, hey, you know what? Like, trans people are not exactly dominating in the field of sports. And I myself have engaged in this conversation every now and then with respect to like examples of very prominent, very famous athletes that have used hormone therapy and have become legends in their own right, overcoming great adversity, such as Lionel Messi, for example. And the reason why we don't make a big deal about that is because Lionel Messi is a cis man. And at the end of the day, though, most of these people that fucking come at it, most of these people that like talk about this problem or claim that there's a massive problem to begin with, are doing it because they've been duped by others who are transphobic. And this creates a fantastic permission structure to shit on trans people. That's it.
Danger of immigrants. That's not to say that crime hasn't happened in this location. There are countless areas in the United States where crime happens, including apartment buildings. And some of those crimes involve gangs.
I understand, but it's complex to someone that doesn't watch you that often to actually know what your stance is on transgender women and women's sports from an outside perspective, since you don't answer it clearly. No, I have. I have answered it time and time again. I don't give a shit. I don't care. I don't care at all. And I don't have any issue with trans women participating in athletic competition all the way up to fucking professional sports with cis women. As long as there is like a level of regulation where someone isn't just like saying I'm a trans woman now without actually undergoing any sort of HRT whatsoever to simply go and compete against cis women, I have no issue with it. And for the record, that example that I just said, that counter narrative, even that in and of itself is not a real one. It's so not a real one that the only time when people fucking actually come out with this is actually Republican charlatans themselves that are like, we couldn't find a single fucking person that actually wanted to portray themselves as a woman to specifically dominate, female sports. So we became that example. Right wingers do this all the fucking time. They do it all the time. It's so weird. Yeah. Here's the greatest example of this. The Daily Wire show, Lady Ballers, wasn't supposed to be a work of fiction. It originally was supposed to be a documentary tracking the process of a cisgender man that, lied and cynically tried to become to try to claim that they were female now so that they could fucking participate in female athletics. They couldn't find an example of that in the real world, and they couldn't even recreate it in the real world themselves, so they decided to make a work of fiction instead. That's how it works, okay? Because nobody wanted to legally, transition to be able to win some sort of fucking athletic competition. Yeah, Joanna Man is the OG version of this that people treat as though it's a fucking documentary.
The starlock to the starlock to the topic just begun. There he is again, Hasan is streaming, Hasan is streaming.